Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. Sadler, and today we're going to be talking about
dealing productively with the accelerating breakdown of norms. And this is kind of a continuation of our last two episodes, but we're going to do something that we promised to do last episode and got to a little tiny bit, and then we ran out of time. So we've been focusing on something that I think a lot of people have been talking about lately, which is this, whatever you want to call it, acceleration or breakdown of all sorts of norms, whether social, political, legal, economic, or cultural. And, it's not something radically new because it's happened before. Any norm you put up, somebody's going to disregard it and break it. But generally, most people do follow them. And we've lived in, or we've grown up too, in a culture where I would say the majority of things we could kind of take for granted. There'd be pockets where things are going off the rails, and then we'd do some, 2020 expose on it, and people would be like, something must be done. But now we're in what feels like a very, very different situation. And, I think this is a very timely topic. You're seeing a lot of op-ed pieces about this and discussions, and people seem to be just kind of, how should we put it? Like at a loss, resourceless. I guess, what would you say?
Yeah, I was kind of like thinking that one of the nice things about being American is we haven't had war on our continent since
the Civil War.
Civil War, yeah. I was just trying to think of there's anything else, even close to it. No, it's the Civil War. I don't know if you want to call it the Cuban War on our continent. I don't know. That's
technically speaking, it's part of the Americas, right?
Yeah, but at least on mainland America, there hasn't been fighting of any sort. For over 100 years, and we don't have that same experience that many other cultures have had of recent warfare, of seeing the total breakdown of society when you have all-out war in your cities.
Yeah, and you could talk about economically. There are countries that went through hyperinflation just in the last couple decades, and everybody lost everything basically. And we've had some bad periods. Think about the 1970s and stagflation, which probably did play a part in bringing down the Carter administration, but that's pretty small compared to, or just think about what happened to Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the oligarchs coming in and basically buying and stealing everything. So we've had it kind of good here.
Yeah, and so I guess it's like when you have a population that doesn't experience a particular disease for a long enough time, you lose your immunity to it. And so unfortunately, we are being tried and have to deal with the vicissitudes of life that have not been cast upon us in several generations, and we have to learn on the fly.
I kind of think so. I'd like to talk about some norms having had, we'll call it a zombie existence, right? So they have just kind of puttered along for a while, and so long as nobody comes up and knocks them down, everyone's like, they're still working. One great example of this is the notion that you'll do better in life if you go to college, which definitely was true for the boomers, probably was true for Gen X for the most part, but you started to see some of the cracks, and there was something like a, however you want to call it, like a social contract in place. If you just, go down this path and do the right things, you'll be rewarded and life will probably work out for you. So if you buy into that, then, you make decisions like taking on significant debt that may be very difficult to discharge. And you start doing that when you're 18 years old and you go to college, because it seems like a smart thing to do. And all these other people around you are like, hey, that's the thing to do, young person. And, a lot of these things turn out to be just mistaken assumptions. And I think, at least when it comes to like, you should go to college thing, there's a lot of people now who are like, well, why should I do that racket? There's probably better ways for me. If I want to get an education, I could probably do it, cobbling together stuff that I study online or in groups. And, if I go into the trades, I'll certainly make more money and I won't incur all this debt, or maybe I just get a job. So at least I'm earning something. And I think that's just one of many examples of things where there was something in place and people kind of agreed on it, and nobody really questioned it too hard. And then somebody pulls out the rug, and then people are like, whoa, what's going on here? And, you look at the Trump administration violating, even legal norms, saying, the Supreme Court says this, and they say so in a unanimous opinion, we're still not going to do what they want. And then, the rest of America is like, that's the Supreme Court. If you're not going to follow that, then is it all up for grabs? So I think those sorts of things are really troubling people. I mean, they don't know what they can trust anymore.
Yeah, well, that seemed like a bedrock thing, at least since was it Andrew Jackson got out of office, the whole Trail of Tears thing. But like, once again, in all of our lifetimes, everyone's that has been alive lifetimes, that has not been violated. And like, then there's a piece of legislation that's going through Congress at this moment that potentially will remove any sort of action that the courts could take, getting rid of contempt.
I saw that. Yeah.
Another thing, like, that how could you try to legislate that and take more power for yourself within the confines of a constitution that seems unconstitutional?
Yeah, it's pretty weird to see the MAGA people going along with that, isn't it? It's as if they, it's kind of like, and I'm not going to suggest this is anything but a far-fetched analogy, but it's like those fungi that get into the ants and parasitize them and get them to, like, climb up to someplace, and then they eat them from the inside, and then they shoot their spores all over the place. You watch these people doing and saying things, and you're like, what could be going through their minds? Don't they have any idea what's coming next if they do this? And I don't know. I mean, all those things I think are really shaking up a lot of people's, what would we call them, fabric of assumptions, things they take for granted.
Yeah, and I don't understand. Like, are they just assuming that the shoe's never going to be on the other foot?
Yeah. I think they're hoping that it never will, right? If they can find ways to control and corral the political workings. I was going to say establishment, but it's not even establishment. It's like they're tearing down the establishment and producing something new. But yeah, I mean, once you like call everything into question, that's not a smart strategy,
I guess another thing that's even like a longer period, like not super recently, is just the steady decay and removal of the old American social contract. You go and you get a good job and you work 40 hours a week and you work within the system. Then at least at the end you're going to be able to retire and get either a pension or your Social Security, and that's been chipped away ever since, I don't know, at least the 80s.
That's right. Yeah.
Expectation is just there. And like, you can see it in the difference in the income and wealth inequality as those have increased basically since the 80s, since we had our golden age post World War II Pax Americana.
Yeah. And pretty drastically. I mean, you're right. There are these trends that you can actually like chart on graphs. And, once you do that, people are like, holy crap, like a CEO pay versus wages, or you know, number of people who are in, say, unions.
Productivity versus wages.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a bit of a side note, but the computer revolution was supposed to like change the workplace in drastic ways. And the workplaces have become more productive by, you know, incorporating computers and the internet and mobile technology and all that kind of cool stuff. But it, you know, it hasn't resulted in any like significant wage increases for people who actually do the work. And you know, they did find, I forget the study that this is, it was a number of years back. They found that, yeah, computers would increase productivity in certain ways. And then they opened up the door to people wasting lots and lots of time with emails and with doing social media and watching YouTube videos, showing their coworkers YouTube videos.
Yeah. But I've seen the data, like, you know, even with that, the productivity per working hour has almost doubled since or more than doubled since the 80s. But the wages have not.
And so many other things have gone up in cost. Healthcare, housing. Yeah, even food stuff nowadays, you know. I think for a while you could be like, well, at least there's cheap food, you know, and now we don't have that. So coming back to our key topic, now that we've kind of set the stage, we were going to give, you know, some advice, some practices, some things that people could do if you're feeling down, anxious about all of these things. We've got some potential remedies. And we spent maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes at the end of the last episode on it because we spent a lot of time on other stuff. So we're going to make good on that promise that we'll talk about it now. And there's a lot of things that come from philosophical perspectives and traditions that can be pretty useful when they're understood and applied. But I actually saw something, and I'd like to get your take on this. Before we get underway, there was a really interesting observation I saw in Twitter. This guy, Cliff Jerrison, wrote, "It's very hard to maintain mental health because so many coping strategies are based on the idea that your anxiety is unwarranted and right now needs more of a extremely warranted, but you still got to water the plants or you'll have both fascism and dead plants approach." And I think, you know, he's making a really great distinction between, you know, whether your emotional responses to the big situation that we're stuck in are warranted, you know, reasonable, reality-based or not. And some of them, you know, some people are Chicken Little, where they're always constantly saying the sky is falling, so nobody listens to them. So, you know, that would be unwarranted. Some people watch anything that comes out of the Trump administration. They're like, we're in Nazi Germany right now. And okay, that's kind of a stretch, you know? But there's a lot of stuff going on where I think if you're a reasonable, well-informed person at this point in time, you could be like, wow, this is pretty bad. You know, there's a lot of nefarious crap going on. And sometimes, you know, we were talking before we began, what was that principle? Don't attribute to malice, but can be attributed to incompetence.
A Heinlein's razor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we got enough of both of them, I think, right now.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, you could actually have a response to stuff saying this is really bad. And that could be quite reasonable.
Yeah. I guess the big thing here is like there's a lot of anxiety, and anxiety can be a useful thing in order to try to like spur you to do something. But if you don't do anything, the anxiety just builds up. And, you know, watering the plant is one thing that, you know, but, you know, I guess we'll talk about this a little bit later, but just to touch on it, like doing something, finding something that you can actually apply your abilities at that helps even in a small way is a way to help you alleviate that anxiety and actually do something useful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could be as simple as knitting, At least when you do that, not only does it keep your hands busy, but you get a scarf afterwards or a nice little hat.
Oh, I was thinking more along the lines of like a food pantry or
there you go. Yeah.
Victory Garden. Those they're kind of low impact, but maybe not for a food pantry. Like people like need food.
Yeah.
All the way up to like really big things. Like I don't know. There's a whole go run for something. Find something that you want to try to actually make the world better at, and run for it in political office if you want. Like those are like slightly bigger things, and that requires organization and getting a larger group of people together. But do something.
Yeah. So all of that could be watering different kinds of plants then.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that one observation that we can make is that a lot of self-help and pop psychology, and even maybe some philosophies of way of life, misunderstood, often will take this standard position that your emotional responses aren't really warranted. So if you have anxiety, there's something wrong with you. It's not that it's a proper response to a world that should make you anxious. I think there probably are times when we should be anxious or fearful, and maybe we don't have to be as fearful as people seem to be right now, but it certainly doesn't seem like, 20 years ago.
Right. Oh yeah. Is it all in your head, or is there something actually there? And that would be the distinction here. And I think there is something there. There is something there.
Yeah. And it's like that old proverb, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right?
Right.
William James actually, so this is like a little bit tangential, but in his Varieties of Religious Experience, he was looking at, people claiming to have religious experiences of the divine in some sense, and that a lot of psychologists wanted to pathologize this and say, well, clearly these people are nuts because, the evidence for that is they're hearing voices. And James said, you're really making a huge assumption there. You're assuming that if somebody is nuts, that is, there's something pathological going on in their mind, that they couldn't also be hearing the voice of God, because maybe God talks through that sort of thing. These are not logically exclusive alternatives. And you psychologists are treating it as if it is. So you can, easily just say, well, hearing voices, clearly insane. It could be that we're screwed up. Right. We're not like perfect stoic sages who never get anything wrong. But that doesn't mean that we're off base when we see bad things happening,
Right. And two things. First thing is, a lot of audio hallucinations that are attributed to ghosts have been found to be like gas leaks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so like these old houses, of course, well, they have people think they're ghosts in them. They see and hear things. It's mostly hear things, but gas leaks cause audio hallucinations.
So it's the gas. It's not that they're hearing the gas. It's that the gas. Okay, yeah, I get you.
And then the second thing is like exactly about paranoia. Like Hemingway was paranoid. Thought that the FBI was tapping his phones. But they were.
Exactly. Yeah, there were all sorts of interesting revelations when those files got unclassified, right?
Yeah, that and like the files on MLK and what they did to him.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh, terrible.
Yeah, they really were trying to gaslight him, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the classic sense of the term, not how teenagers use it to describe any sort of deception whatsoever, but...
As well as like literally told him to go kill himself, otherwise they're going to release these documents.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about some practices. One that suggested itself to me right away that I think can be quite helpful for people, if it's not misunderstood, is what gets called the dichotomy of control in Stoic philosophy. And this is probably familiar to quite a few people outside of Stoicism through things like 12-step programs, where they make a distinction between what's in your control, what's not in your control. Epictetus actually talks about it as what's up to us and what's not up to us. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we do see discussed by other Stoic authors. So it's not just Epictetus. So, I think some people oversimplify this, and it might be less productive if they do that. But the general idea is that you can divide things up into these two classes. The things that are actually up to us, meaning we are in charge of them, we determine them if we choose to. If we just kind of like, we just kind of like, I was going to say lollygag, but that's not the right word. We just kind of like let things go and don't pay attention to them. Somebody else will decide them. And then there's stuff that really is up to other people or to, external affairs, or I don't know, the workings of the universe. Like if I get cancer, that's not like something that I chose for myself, and I can choose to take medication, but I don't choose whether I have it or don't have it. And so, what's up to us? Well, things like what we think or what we feel, at least to some degree, or what we choose and what we reject, what we commit ourselves to, what kind of priorities we establish for ourselves, what character we have. Those are all, up to us. And then a lot of things aren't up to us, what they call externals and indifference. And they include a lot of things that I think some people would have some problems with, like pleasure and pain, wealth and poverty, social status, positions and powers, what other people think or feel, even our own bodies. Because people will say, wait a second, I can control what my reputation is because I don't say terrible things in social media, so people don't think I'm an idiot, and that's great, but people can still come to think you're an idiot, even if you're not, right? And, you can wash your body and exercise it and feed it properly and still get hit by the bus or get cancer or whatever. So it's not saying you don't have any stake or any input. It's just that you don't determine these things completely.
Yeah, I guess going to the whole reputation, there's many people throughout history that probably were terrible people but had good reputations because they were able to write the power. Or maybe a contemporary example is Hillary Clinton had like 20-30 years of negative people talking about her constantly, that her reputation was not up to her at all. It was up to 1,000 other people talking about her all the time. Both positive and good. Positive and negative. And once again, it's like it might not all be up to you. Like we watch so many movies where there's the one hero and he does it all. And, you got your Mission Impossible. All the Mission Impossible is kind of nice because they at least have a teamwork to a certain extent. But there's so many things was it John McClane, the Live Free or Die, or Die Hard, the Die Hard films, right? And
so right, yeah.
One guy against everything,
or James Bond. I mean, he's got some tools that his people gave him, and then it's totally up to him. Yeah,
right. And there's 8 billion or 9 billion people on the planet, and you are not going to be able to turn the movements of the planets and change all those people's opinions or whatnot, but you can help change a couple. And if you get together with a whole bunch of other people, you can help. What you're doing, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, find something, even as small as you are in control of that move towards trying to help a thing. Once again, it might not actually end up how you want it, but you are making your choice to apply your effort in that place.
And in doing so, you are making a choice about what kind of person you're going to be, what we call character. So are you going to be the kind of person who when things look bad, just like cowers inside themselves or turns around and abandons everybody else? Or are you going to be the kind of person who steps up and does something, even if it's not guaranteed to work? And, maybe there's only a 1% chance it's going to work.
Yeah. And for bad or good, people have taken their own decisions to try to change big things. I'm thinking about what was it? Like when Kennedy was assassinated or something, either Bobby or John. I'm not advocating that or anything, but small people do have big impacts sometimes, and those people were rather determined.
That's right. Yeah. So, if we accept this idea, which I think is a pretty reasonable idea, some things are up to us, some things are not, then, we can get better at, in situations, identifying and distinguishing these things from each other and saying, okay, I can do something about this. Maybe I can't fix everything, but there's not much I can do about this. So I'm going to put my attention, my effort, my emotional investment over here. And then these other things, they're going to happen as they're going to happen. I don't have to smile and pretend that they're all great or anything. If something is crappy, it's still crappy. But it's not my responsibility at that point to try to fix everything. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time with that. They recognize that things aren't up to them intellectually or cognitively, but they still remain emotionally invested in it. So think about if you have a loved one who's suffering from something and they lost their job, they're having a medical crisis, they had a terrible breakup. You would like them to feel better. And that's a good thing to want them to feel better, right? But you sure as hell can't make them feel better. And any of the little patches you try to put on it, well, let's go out to eat, or here's some chocolate cake, or let's watch this movie together, they're not really going to fix anything. And maybe they'll never come out of their funk. You don't control that,
No.
So, but I think a lot of people make themselves responsible for that stuff. So if we can, so how does that translate to the environment that we're in? So we might feel, because we've got so much access to all this news through not just news channels, but websites and social media and everybody else posting about this, as if these things are really up to us. Think about Gaza. There's really not much I can do about that. I can, make a couple statements about, thinking that this is wrong to do to people, but nobody's going to listen to me. So I don't have to view that as something that's up to me, that I have to do something about, especially if there's a whole bunch of other things I do have to do something about,
That's the whole was it put your mask on first? I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But there's once again, the airplane always tells you to put your mask on first before you go and help someone else. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but how can you make sure that you are doing, if you're going to just be wallowing in your anxiety and then it makes it so that you can't do the things that you need to do in order to make sure that you can continue living a good enough life, then you're going to make it more and more difficult for you to actually actualize these things that you'd like to see in the world.
Yeah, that's right. And, another thing with the mask thing, I think they do say, before you put on your mask, before you worry about anyone else. And I think if I remember right, they even say, parents with your children, you make sure to put your mask on before you worry about your kids, because there's this tendency to hyperfixate on, I got to save my kids, but you're not going to save them if you don't attend to what's actually up to you. One of the worries,
your kid, if they're too short, they're not going to be able to help you put your mask on.
Yeah, I mean, if they're too young too, they're not going to know what to do.
Right.
Yeah. And I suppose if you have like your emotional support animal, you know, they're not going to help you out either. They'll give you emotional support, but they're not going to put your mask on. So, you know, I think one of the worries that people have about this, and this comes up all the time, you know, Stoicism means passivity, fatalism, just accepting things the way they are. And that's not actually the case. It should make you more dynamic, more active, but you should be able to like rationally choose, where am I going to put my resources of time, attention, effort, you know, struggle, those sorts of things. And the other thing I think that's important, you know, I really like the fact that Epictetus brings up how Socrates probably only got through to maybe 1 out of 100 people. Because Socrates is like an idol for him, you know, that's who he would like to be like. Socrates is trying to get people just to like stop paying attention to their money, their physical beauty, their possessions, their social status, and to pay attention to their personality and character. And most of the time he doesn't succeed, and they kill him for it in the end, you know. And Socrates, that didn't stop him. He did keep trying to do things, but he didn't allow it to get him down when things didn't work out that way. He just moved on to the next person. So, you know, we can do the things that we think are the right things to do and care about them, but not be so invested in the outcome as if the outcome determines whether it was worth it or not. Another way of saying it, it's always worth it to do the right thing, even if it doesn't pay off.
Right. But I think it gives us a good place for us to think about what is real. And as you're talking about, like, people's like, oh, it makes Stoics so passive. It makes that you're just accepting the world. It's like, yeah, you accept the world as it is at this moment, so you can make a really good or better decision what happens now. And we have had other unprecedented times in the past. And this is not the first time that we've been had a situation in the human condition that this has happened, and we have some pretext. So,
yeah, I mean, you could say that we have lived through a really unusual period of super stability, at least here in the United States. I mean, we had a lot of problems, right? Granted, but overall, things have been pretty good by comparison to most times in history and most societies. So, you know, maybe that, I don't want to say it made us soft, but it gave us the wrong impression about how things are going to be in the world. And so we can, you know, we can look at other times. This is why reading literature can be very helpful. Reading history, reading philosophy, it gives us, what would you call it? Like a broader perspective or frameworks for seeing how we're not that different. And I think that Americans are a little bit, not just because of the prosperity, but also because Americans tend to focus primarily just on America. You know, if you go to other countries, they know a lot more about what's happening in other countries on the whole than Americans tend to. There are some exceptions. Russians don't know much about what's happening outside of Russia, but that's in part because the state controls the media. And then, you know, I think something else that's kind of screwed us up, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this. You know, they talk about American exceptionalism, this belief that like America is different than other countries, civilizations, societies. We're somehow like better or blessed. And if you do believe that sort of thing, then I guess on the one hand, you're likely to like think, oh, it's all going to work out somehow, right? The guiding hand of history is behind us. Or if you don't buy that, you'll be like, wow, this is really terrible because the good guys are getting screwed. You know?
Right. I guess I think that the biggest thing about American exceptionalism is that we are so weird. I guess like we're different. And we are exceptional, but it doesn't make us like we are an exception, not that we are the best. I think is a better way to look at that.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I think a lot of people glom those two together, you know?
But yeah, like the whole idea of being very like America centric, like the only reason that I don't know, I guess I grew up with a household that listened to a lot of NPR, and so they'll actually talk about other countries' national elections on a regular basis, and then at night they'll play the BBC, and so I guess I get to hear the British, look at the world to a certain extent, and outside of that, like that was just not part of the media or the regular zeitgeist, unless it directly impacted America, right?
Yeah. It's interesting too, because if you look at previous big civilizations that eventually went bust, they had similar points of view. Like, I mean, the Roman Empire was a great example. China's done this a number of times, you know. I mean, the word for China means, the kingdom at the middle of the earth, Zhonghua. And you can look at more recent examples, like, at one time, France was kind of the center of Europe and the world, really, for a couple centuries, from the time of like Louis XIV all the way through to the time of Napoleon. And then you had the British Empire, which, the empire with the sun never set on, right? And after World War II, they were just like knocked to crap and started decolonizing, and all sorts of things went wrong. And each one of them thought that like they were the pinnacle of civilization. It could not possibly go wrong for them, and then it did,
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like, you get like maybe 200, 300 years and that's about it, maybe a little longer in the case of Rome, or some Chinese dynasties. But for the most part, you're not going to stay on top. I mean, at one time, the Portuguese were the hot thing, or the Dutch.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see the people that do histories on this, and like most of the times, almost never do these large civilizations break up because of external factors.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Internal factors. It's either like massive slave rebellion, or things like that happened in I can't think of it. Sparta, as a small example of it. So much land got so concentrated in so few families that no one could like go out and just calcify the whole.
I guess you could call it like economic inefficiencies, right? That seem to be going the right way, and then they're not going the right way. I mean, we had something like that with the Great Depression, where you had all these goods being manufactured and nobody could afford to purchase them. And then you're like, well, what do we do with this crap? And then of course we had an, environmental collapse, in the whole Dust Bowl thing, which led to a lot of problems. And that I think that's one thing that sometimes leads to these, we could call them empires falling.
I think I spoke about this last time, that there was a historian I was reading recently who said like the only reason why America didn't fall apart after that was because of the New Deal. That like all the other big empires that had that amount of like as they call them, robber barons, or the Gilded Age type things, had fallen apart, unless you do something to really make it so the general populace can benefit from the benefits of the economy.
Yeah, and it wasn't just redistributing wealth, although a good bit of that happened. It was creating jobs, and creating like job tracks for people, I mean, it didn't hurt that then we got into a big war and went on a wartime economy after that, right? So we almost like had a double dipping there,
Right. It was what we call it, a super Keynesian.
Yeah. But I think to bring this one to a close, because we do want to talk about a few others, you can look at people who lived in those times And you can say, wow, it's possible to live a good, meaningful life that makes contributions even when things are breaking down. They might not be ultimately making contributions to the glory of Rome or the, empire on which the sun never sets, but maybe you're making it for some future thing, Right. I think I always think of like Augustine and Boethius, two great early medieval philosophers who didn't know that they were medievals because they just saw a Roman Empire that was like going to crap. And they still wrote their books and they still carried out their projects, and we're still reading them today. They've become part of our intellectual heritage. And we don't worry about whether they were Roman or not. We think about
Right.
them as people who have something to tell us in the present.
Yeah. So let us examine our emotional reactions to these things fall apart. And I guess the one thing I want to grab here, just before we totally move on, is kind of thinking about like Hobbs and Lock and how they looked at the differences in their own worlds falling apart. Specifically, Hobbs, just constant war for the vast majority of his life. Is like, I just need any source of stability. Don't care what it is. Give it to me. Give me the Leviathan. Don't care. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a situation like that, it is easy to understand. The English Civil War is what we're talking about, which was incredibly bloody, had multiple sides, and when you read Leviathan and you see Hobbes talking about like, we got to rein these preachers in. We got to, get rid of the Cicero and Plato and Aristotle. And then you look at what people were actually doing with, the Bible and these ancient authors, using them to basically justify why this guy should be in charge, or, why we should undermine these other people. It's really easy to understand Hobbes's perspective. I think some people come to from the outside and they're like, "Oh, he's terrible," He just wants a tough, sovereign who's going to boss us all around and be mean to us. And Hobbes's, position is, well, if you don't want that, then what? You want this crap over here that we're living through,
Right. So how does one regulate one's emotional reactions to these sometimes momentous changes in one's life and the society that we live in?
Yeah, and there's a number of emotions. We've talked a lot about anxiety, but I think anger can also be a real temptation for people because it feels more active, right? So you get mad and then you post on, I don't know, Twitter, Instagram, F these guys, this is terrible. But it doesn't actually do a lot. So, one key insight that you see, like everybody in ancient times, actually all the way up to the early modern period, all these philosophers, they don't think of emotions as just feelings that we have. It's not just stimulus response. There's a cognitive aspect to them. So we have judgments and assumptions, a sense. Emotions can be, in some sense, true or false. That is, reflective of what's actually the case. So if I get angry at, I don't know, you and I get into an argument because, I don't know, we disagree about how long the radio show should be, and you're joking around and you say, I think it should be 3 hours. And I'm like, I can't believe that SOB. He wants me to hang out here for 3 hours. And now I'm all mad and stuff like that. I'm mad because I'm assuming something that isn't the case, which is that you're serious about this proposition, right? And I'm wrong to make that assumption. Right. And so people who are like, oh, emotions aren't good or bad or right or wrong. Every ancient philosopher basically says that's bullshit. They are. You can evaluate them. So I think when we, first of all, put aside that idea that's so prevalent in our culture that, our emotions are just what we feel and there's nothing we can do about them. We get this hook that we can sink in and we can be like, well, let me see if this makes sense or not. Right?
Oh, like the emotion will come however you want, or if you want it or not. But if you don't have the cognitive portion of it and you just go automatically to the, oh yes, of course, that's right, then you're skipping a step. and you're not actually doing the work to determine, okay, what was the reason, as you were talking about, like in the example, I'm joking, you didn't think I was joking, and so you're making an assumption about what my motivation or what I'm even trying to convey there, and because you have that incorrect judgment about what the reality of the situation is, you've come to, well, that's screwed up. How dare Dan do that?
Yeah, and going back to the don't attribute to malice what could be attributed to incompetence, right? You could still be mad at somebody for being incompetent and screwing up your paycheck, right? Sure. Like when the Doge thing was shutting down all these federal grants, which like had massive effects throughout the economy, because it turned out that all of these grants were like, trickling into all these different pies, let's just call them, all over the place. Maybe there was some malice there in some of the things. We'll shut down everything that has to do with DEI. But there was a lot of it where you're just like, what are these idiots doing? Who let these jackasses in, and, you could still get angry at them. That the anger is probably not going to help, but,
This reminds me of a quick aside. A couple of years ago, I put several $1,000s into a bank and like went to the teller or whatnot, and the teller put my account number in incorrectly.
Yeah.
And so they put this several $1,000s into someone else's bank account. And I was able to catch it very ATM, and it was just gone. It wasn't there, but I was able to talk to them. They figured it out quickly, and thankfully, I wasn't like angry at the person, but it seemed like the manager thought I was going to be angry at the person. The teller.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I was like, no, I want to know if you're going to do anything to try to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen. Is there a policy or process you can put in place? He never told me that. And he thought that like, oh, I've talked to the person. I was like, I don't like... Mistakes happen all the time. I want to know if you could actually do something to try to reduce the mistake from happening again.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say he was prepared to deal with an angry customer, right? So maybe that preparation, that focus made him less able to concentrate on what was actually in front of him, namely a customer who was being reasonable and saying, let's problem solve. You've got an ineffective SOP here. Let's see if we can fix this,
Right. So we want to figure out like what are the things that we can actually think about when one of these emotions hits us, and what are some of the things that we can ask? And we've got a couple here on, is it the right time or occasion for this emotional response? And is this the right reason that I should be responding to this thing? So what's your thoughts here?
Yeah. And those are two different things, right? The reason, we could call it the motivation or the thought process. Am I right in assessing things and then getting angry or scared or, I don't know, envious or sad or something like that? And, there's a lot of cases where it's not, well, so think about the bank teller thing, right? Wouldn't it have been productive for you to be like red in the face and shouting and spitting and stuff like that? Would that have like made the situation any better? Sure would have played into this manager's like script that he was ready for, but he probably wasn't looking forward to that,
No. And then also it was like, once again, should I be yelling at a manager about like that sort of thing? What is the time or occasion to be angry about something like that?
That leads into another one too, though, right? Target, right? Anger is very common with this, but I think that fear is common where it gets misdirected. So I'll this is not about the economy or anything like that, but think about people who they've been in a bad relationship. They're kind of gun shy because somebody was abusive to them. They get into a new relationship. They're, like walking on eggshells, even though they don't need to be. Their fear has the wrong target. They were rightly fearful of the jerk who they were with before. The new person is just fine, and they don't need to be fearful of them. Or, if you'd got really angry with that bank manager, he's not the one who made the policy. So,
and then also, right amount is also very important. Like, okay, you can, even if you think that someone has done you wrong, because that's usually what leads you to a feeling of anger, that there's some incongruity with how things ought to be and they're not. And if you blow up at like a kid stepping on your shoe, that's not going to help anything. That's a very incorrect amount of response to a child doing a thing that a child does. Especially if it was like inadvertent, like just the kid's not looking, right? Kids do that a lot. And also, if you're an adult, like yelling at a child isn't a good look, and it doesn't actually help the situation. It's probably going to get their parents really annoyed with you or angry with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like yelling at my own kids that I've done in the past, and it almost never had a useful effect with, what I had originally intended. Is almost always counterproductive. But this could apply too to like these big global situations. So it could be like, how angry should you be that they're doing this thing now? Maybe not so angry, because it's not, your anger isn't actually changing anything. It's just making you upset and making people around you on edge. Or it could be sadness, like something happens and you're like, oh, so for example, I don't care about what's happening to Harvard myself because I'm not a Harvard person, and I will never, likely send anybody to Harvard. But, if I cared about Harvard and I took them as being somehow emblematic of higher education, I could be very bothered about the fact that the Trump administration is going after them on every front that they possibly can. And I could get all down and depressed about that. Oh, this is gutting our educational system. Now, that's based on some false premises that Harvard is somehow the stand-in, for higher ed, when really they're like a weird, exceptional, special la la land of their own that has nothing to do with the rest of us. And it actually probably takes resources away from the rest of us, frankly, in higher ed in some respects. But, I could, let's say I was going to be upset about it, like fearful or sad. It might make sense to get somewhat worried about it and be like, well, if they can do that to Harvard, then they can do that to UW-Madison. And I don't want to see that happening to our state flagship university, or they could do it to, some of the places where I work, and then, maybe I'm out of a job or something. So it could make sense to have some fear. Does it make sense to be like, oh, this is the worst thing that ever possibly happened? No, that's irrational, or to be sad about things. There's programs that have ended and we're not going to get them back. And we could be sad about that. And it's fine to be a little sad, but I don't think you have to go into a deep depression about it. Even if you lost your job because of it, it's not like there aren't any other jobs anywhere, right?
Right. As well as like, if you allow these emotional states to make it so you're not doing anything, I think that's like really counterfactual to what you ought to be doing to like actually make yourself feel better in the end. Like, I feel doing is the antidote for many of these things. And I know that sometimes it becomes incredibly difficult, especially if you're like talking about like clinical depression or whatnot. But like just doing helps an immense amount. And I think that the anger that leads you to like go and tweet or whatever on the internet
and doom scroll and
it is all a solve and not actually a cure. And a cure is actually going out and doing something, because just yelling out into the void of the internet isn't going to actually get anything done.
Yeah, they call it internet activism, and the activism is in quotes. Well, we should talk about a final practice then that kind of suggests. So in the end of Voltaire's novel Candide, there's this famous line, "We must cultivate our garden."
Mhm.
And a lot of people have interpreted that like, oh, we should withdraw completely into our special walled garden and screw everybody else. You know, I got mine and I'll make my beautiful garden and I don't want to hear anything about the world outside. And that isn't what the characters were doing. There were a couple, you know, important differences there. First of all, they were all hanging out together. So it wasn't
Mhm.
like, you know, they're just each retreating into their own little house or cubicle or something like that. Um, but, you know, the emphasis is not on having a garden and walling it off and keeping everybody else out. It's on cultivating it, you
Mhm.
know, which could mean doing things that will. So, if we want to use the garden metaphor, you cultivate some plants, you got enough of them, you give them to somebody else, you know,
Mhm.
you spread that stuff. Or you feed other people, or you know, whatever it's going to be in your garden, whether it's flowers or fruits or vegetables or I don't know, fungi or you know,
I
rabbits.
suppose, like, if you're cultivating, then you can potentially invite other people in. It's like, oh, do you want to help cultivate with me? Do you want to help
Oh
build
yeah,
with me? You know, it's and once again, they are together.
yeah.
Man, that the book is such a trip. Just everyone's like, it should have been this way, and this should have been that way, and nothing turns out the way that they wanted because nothing happens how it should.
Yeah, no single plan that they ever do ever pays off remotely like what they're intending.
Right.
But that's part of the wisdom that they
Well, yeah,
acquire by the end.
that was the whole point that Voltaire was trying to put forward. That, you know, not there's not what, like, an intended outcome.
Yeah. Well, he was also attacking Leibniz's notion of like pre-established harmony and this is the best
Mhm.
of all possible worlds. And he wasn't like going to the other extreme and saying it's the worst of all possible
All
worlds,
right.
but it's the world. It is what it is. So I kind of think, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this. This should not be the go-to starting point for anybody. It isn't in the book, right?
Hmm.
We shouldn't be like, okay, things suck. Let's cultivate our garden. Screw everything else. Right? It should be something that we arrive at, maybe.
Who arrive at, like, it's not a starting point, but like an ending point that you need to go through the trials and realize that.
I don't think you have to like suffer everything,
Okay.
but you don't want to immediately say, okay, I've had enough of this crap garden, you know, for me.
Hmm. Yeah, and once again, that way that you put it there just very much seems like I'm going to remove myself from this. But it's I like the idea of the analogy being um, more along the lines of build what you can.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
You know, and you know, one of my favorite books or movies from when I was a kid. You know, if you build it, they will come.
Oh, Field of Dreams, right?
Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be bringing us to the end of our hour, and I do like the idea of ending on, you know, if we built it, they would come. But we're actually going to leave you with the words of John Kabat-Zinn today, which he says, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf."